So a while ago, I created an FN pipe in Angular that would allow me to pass in a method reference on the current component that would be used to format the given template value. And the reason that I was doing this in the template as opposed to just creating a, say, formatted message property on the component is that I could use the PurePipe's implicit caching layer to make sure that this method only gets called when the input changes and not necessarily in every change detection digest. Ideally, change detection digest would be managed with the change detection strategy on push, but that's not always possible, and it's still nice to be able to move kind of superficial formatting to the template itself as opposed to in the component logic. And this was nice, but the problem is that it passes this format message, which is down here, as a naked or unbound function reference. It doesn't pass it like it's a bound method of app component, so that when you call this, this reference is null or undefined. But ideally, what would be great is if it was actually bound to app component. So I wanted to try to find a way to inject the app component instance into the FN pipe. And unfortunately, I didn't really find a good way to do that, but I did find something that does work. So if we jump over into the FN pipe, which you can see here has the transform method, which takes the value that's being piped in, and the function reference, and you can see we're calling dot apply in that function reference, and we're passing in the various arguments. And you'll see that we're using this dot context for the apply. In my previous FN pipe incarnation, I passed this in as null, but this time I'm passing it in as a pipe property. And if we look up here at the constructor, the context here is the injected context, or it defaults to null. And the injected context is something of type FN pipe context. Now you can see here that I'm exporting basically an empty class of FN pipe context, and that's just to give this a type that can be injected. By default, nothing will be a provider of FN pipe context, which is why this is optional. But if we go back to our app component, what we can see is that in the component metadata, I'm setting up a view providers collection, and here I'm saying for the FN pipe context, actually use the app component class. So when Angular instantiates app component, it will keep that instance in the current injector, such that when this FN pipe context needs to be fulfilled in the FN pipe class, it will use the app component instance as that fulfillment, which allows us to then use the app component instance as the execution context for that passed in function reference, which, remember, this is format message. So to make sure this works, I wanted to come up with just like a really silly trivial case here. Inside of the format message, I'm simply grabbing the name of the constructor of the current context of the current this, and I'm outputting that in the string. So you can see we have this square brackets constructor name, and then we're just outputting the value that was passed in. And if we jump over into the browser here, I'll refresh, you can see that it doesn't really matter which message we choose. The important part is that inside that square brackets is app component. Remember, that's, again, this dot constructor dot name app component, and that works because the this reference here is being bound to the instance of app component, which is being defined as the FN pipe context, which is then being injected into the FN pipe as the FN pipe context type, which is then being used as the execution context when we call dot apply. So this works, but it's ugly, and it feels inelegance, not the right word, because I think there is a certain degree of elegance to it, but it's heavy-handed, it's verbose, it's unattractive, it doesn't have enjoyable developer ergonomics. So I probably wouldn't use this, even though it works. Probably what I would do is just come back to this and define it with a fat arrow, something like this, so that it's not truly an instance method, it's not truly a class method, it's more a class property that happens to point to a bound function, which would work perfectly fine. And how easy is that? Nice and simple and clean, and works exactly how you would hope it would. So again, being able to set up the view provider and inject the current component into the pipes that are in the current template, this works, but just doesn't seem like an enjoyable approach. I'm just sharing it here sort of as an experiment, as a research and learning moment, but again, not really anything that I would recommend.